evening, folks, and welcome back to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and we have a very special episode for you guys this week. We're counting down the top 10 greatest horror movie sequels of all time. Now, you might think, oh, horror sequels, so many franchises that went on much too long with terrible sequels. And that is true in a lot of cases, but there are some great horror sequels, as we'll talk about in this entry. There's a lot of great second acts, especially, but does seem like once you get to the third and fourth and fifth, that the series definitely seems to go downhill, and so it's very hard to find a great third or fourth one or fifth one. Um, but you'll see that there are a lot of great sequels, and we'll talk about them in this video. I'm going to start off the show with some honorable mentions, some ones that just barely missed the cut. And I've had a very hard time not including this one, but The Day of the Dead, directed by George A. Romero. The third entry in the beloved Dead trilogy by George Romero. Another awesome zombie epic. Check it out. Next up is Scream 2. Another great entry in the franchise that completely reinvigorated the slasher genre. Directed by the great horror maestro Wes Craven. Check it out. Next up is Saw 2. Oh yes, there will be blood. I really like this one because of Donnie Wahlberg's performance. I felt he was great as Detective Matthews. A very worthy adversary to Jigsaw. And I like that you see Jigsaw a lot more in this film. He's a lot more involved. So check out Saw 2. Next one you guys might find a little bit controversial. The Bride of Reanimator. You might say, oh yeah, this one's pretty cheesy, pretty campy. In a lot of ways it is, but if you think about it, the original did have a lot of humor and definitely had some camp value. But what elevates this film is the great performance again by Jeffrey Combs as Dr. Herbert West, which I've said before, as I feel that Dr. Herbert West performance by Jeffrey Combs in the original is the best horror performance of all time. That's my opinion. And I think he's just as good in The Bride of Reanimator. So check it out, Bride of Reanimator. So now let's get to the nitty gritty, folks. The top 10 horror movie sequels of all time. And you might be shocked at my first pick. In at number 10 is Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Yes, that's right. The most fun entry in the franchise. If you're looking for fun in a horror movie, you absolutely can't get better than this. And it doesn't take itself too seriously. There's a lot of satire. It's almost like a parody of the Friday the 13th franchise. But it never forgets to be a horror film as well. So it's kind of like Scream in a lot of ways, and this actually predated Scream. So Wes Craven can thank the makers of Friday the 13th Part 6, I think. Next up, how could you possibly not include this film in any horror movie sequel list, and that is The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, I actually have it as part of this great box set here. So anyone who loves Universal Monsters, you need to get this. Have a better look at The Bride of Frankenstein right here. Really cool action figure, I thought. So what I love about The Bride of Frankenstein is that you get another great performance by Boris Karloff as the monster. And I love how his character progresses. He starts to speak, and he gets smarter and smarter as the movie goes along, and then he decides he wants a mate to join him. So Dr. Frankenstein comes up and builds the mate to the monster. Awesome sequel, folks. Next up, we delve into the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, one of the longest running franchises going. I'm going to pick A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors, because this film is so much fun, and it's got some of Freddy's best lines ever. I love Robert Englund as Freddy, especially in this movie. He's so much fun. And I love the great dream sequences. And I love the idea about the patients getting together and to teaming up against Freddy. And I love how in the dreams they all have their own special powers. And that's one of the great things, and that provides some great action. Friday the 13th Part 3. I'm sorry, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warrior. Sorry, folks. I'm a little tired today. Next up might be another um, controversial entry, and that is Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. And how can you get any more fun than this film, folks? Yes, the original was so much more serious, and the original is so brutal and so visceral and just terrifying. And now with the sequel, they went with a lot more humor and a lot more over the top gore. And it's just so much fun, though. There's so many great performances, and it's just batshit crazy. It's a lot crazier than the original. It's just not afraid to go there. That's what I love about it. So Tobe Hooper returns to direct the second entry in the beloved Leatherface franchise, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Next up, an absolutely awesome sequel, folks, and that is Hellbound Hellraiser 2. A movie that matches the original pretty much in every way. It's got all the thrills and chills of the original. Another awesome performance by Doug Bradley as Pinhead. I love the Cenobites in this picture. And we also get Ashley Lawrence returning to the franchise. And she's such a welcome return. Another great performance by her. This time, Tony Randall takes over the reins as director from Clyde Barker. And he does a great job, in my opinion. Next up, you might say, what the hell were they thinking? Why would they make a sequel to the most perfect horror movie ever made? But they did, and that is Psycho 2, which I feel is incredibly underrated franchise, and especially the second entry. You might think it's complete lunacy to make a sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, but they do an amazing job. And once again, Anthony Perkins is awesome as Norman Bates. And this movie is just so incredibly suspenseful, I thought. I'd say it's even more suspenseful than the original, dare I say. I wouldn't say it's as artistic as the original, but it's just an excellent, excellent sequel. And I like that they brought back Vera Miles as Lila Loomis. And it's such a great, like, whodunit as well. You like, did Norman really do it, or is he getting set up? And it just really keeps you on the edge of your seat. Psycho 2, folks. Next up, we have my absolute favorite entry in this franchise, and that is Friday the 13th Part 2. An absolutely awesome sequel, I think. It's so incredibly well shot, and it's absolutely great action. This movie definitely has more action and more thrills than even the original, I think. It's so well paced, it's so well shot, and it's just as scary. It really is just as scary as the original, which was also great. But I like that this time around, Jason is actually the killer. So I thought that was really cool that they brought Jason into the mix and made him the actual killer. And of course, Jason went on to be probably the most famous horror icon, Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 2. Um, Next up, I had a hard time at this one because is it really a horror film or is it sci-fi action? It is sci-fi action, but there definitely is some great scares. So the fact that this is one of the greatest sequels of all times, there's no question about it. Aliens. Directed this time around by the great James Cameron, and this is certainly one of his greatest films of all time. Once again, Sigourney Weaver returns as the great Ellen Ripley, the biggest female action hero of all time, I would say. And this is definitely a thrilling sequel with, I would say, with a lot more action than the original. Um, the action is absolutely off the hook, and amazing visual effects once again. And this film is just loaded with fun. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, we get to the top two, the real nitty gritty, baby. And I don't think this one will be much of a surprise. But here we go. The greatest horror film of all time in the zombie genre. And that is The Dawn of the Dead, directed by George Romero. Um, it's absolutely the greatest epic of zombie cinema history, no question about it. And that is George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. It's got such great zombie carnage, amazing makeup effects and gore effects by great Tom Savini, and it's got such great social commentary as well. It's just so funny how it's like a reflection of our real world in a lot of ways, um, but done in a fantasy way. It's excellently directed and it's so much fun. There's a lot of great humor as well, and it's terrifying as well. So you cannot go wrong with Dawn of the Dead, an amazing sequel, one of the best sequels ever made, and certainly one of the best horror movie sequels ever made. Now, if you guys know me, you probably won't be surprised at my pick for the number one of all time horror movie sequels. But if you don't, you might be surprised. But for me, it's Halloween 2, baby, from 1981, sequel to what I feel is the greatest horror film of all time. So Halloween also has the greatest horror sequel of all time, and that's my opinion. And that is Halloween 2, this time around directed by Rick Rosenthal. Now, how could you possibly ask for a better sequel than this? It matches the thrills and chills of the original. It's got the same dark tone, the same feel as the original, but there's a lot of things that make it its own great sequel. And that's the fact they further the story along. You find out that Michael Myers is actually Laurie Strode's sister. And I thought that was a really cool twist on this franchise. And once again, you get awesome performances by Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasence, returning to their iconic roles, and they do an amazing job. And this movie is still so damn scary, just like the original. And you also get an extremely awesome Michael Myers, played by Dick Warlock. All this guy has to do is walk down a hallway and you're scared to death. That's how good he is. That's how great of a film this is. So Halloween 2 is my pick for the greatest horror sequel of all time, folks. And thank you guys so much for joining me in the horror corner. Tune in and stay scared.